Welcome, everybody, to our Women's History Month program. I'm extremely excited about the incredible speakers that you will be hearing from this afternoon. My name is Terrence Evans. I am the president of the California Lawyers Association, and I am so excited about these wonderful history makers that you will be hearing from. We will, of course, be hearing from the organizer of this wonderful program, Adrieannette Ciccone. She is the first Black woman to lead the litigation section, which is the largest section of the largest voluntary state bar association in the United States. Just an extraordinary leader in our community, has done incredible work in the area of civil rights and fundraising for scholarships, just a true trailblazer in her own right. We'll also be hearing from my good friend Jose Cordova, the first Latino leader of the largest section of the largest state bar in the United States, a trailblazer in his own right, a tireless advocate for civil rights, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a tremendous contributor to scholarship programs throughout the great state of California. We will hear about the incredible Judge Ladoris Cordell, who, of course, is the first Black woman appointed to the bench in Northern California, but so much more than that. All of the incredible history making that she has done, all of the careers that she has helped to mold and shape, and all of the incredible people that she has inspired over her incredible, amazing career. And last but not least, we'll hear about the amazing Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte, my good friend and mentor, who is the reason why we understand what diversity on the bench looks like in California. Before Judge Harbin-Forte, we had no idea how many women there were on the bench, how many people of color there were on the bench, how many members of the LGBTQ plus community. It is her hard work that made all of that possible. Before her incredible work, she would literally call around to every courthouse in California, keeping track of these stats and holding all of our governors accountable, Republican and Democrat, to make sure that the bench look like the people of California. It is because of her that we have achieved so much, and we still will continue to build on her legacy. Without further ado, I will hand the virtual microphone to my good friend, and contributor to this wonderful program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Terrence. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jose Cordova, and I am the chair of CLA's litigation section. On behalf of the litigation section, I welcome you all to this program titled Living Legends, or Living Judicial Legends, Trailblazers by definition. Today's program includes two illustrious speakers, retired Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte and retired Judge Ladoris Cordell. Judge Harbin-Forte served more than 27 years in the Alameda County Courts. Her judicial assignments included criminal and civil jury trials and hearings, the drug courts, presiding judge of the juvenile court, presiding judge of the appellate division of the Superior Court, and full-time settlement judge for civil and family law cases. She received her bachelor's degree from UC Berkeley and her law degree also from UC Berkeley in 1979, the same year she was admitted to the California bar. The next distinguished speaker is retired Judge Ladoris Cordell. Judge Cordell is a graduate of Stanford Law School. She was the first lawyer to open a law practice in East Palo Alto, which is a low-income community of color. In 1982, Governor Jerry Brown appointed Ms. Cordell to the Municipal Court of Santa Clara County. In 1988, Judge Cordell won election to the Superior Court of Santa Clara County, making her the first African-American woman to sit on the Superior Court in Northern California. In 2001, she retired from the bench to become Vice Provost and Special Counselor to the President for Campus Relations at Stanford University, my alma mater. Her memoir is titled Her Honor, and it was a finalist for the 2021 California Book Award in Nonfiction and was released in the fall of 2022. Please give your thanks and your attention to the distinguished panelists.
Thank you so much, Jose, and thank you so much, Terrence. Thank you so much to everyone for being here. My name is Adrieannette Ciccone, and I have the privilege and honor of moderating this program. This program is a second annual program done in conjunction with the litigation section and with the Racial Justice Committee. And today, what you will hear from our distinguished guests and panelists is things that you wouldn't know by necessarily doing a quick Google search online. You will hear the tea and all of the important things that we really want to know about their upbringing and what their journey to becoming attorneys was like, what their journey to the bench was, what being on the bench at that time for both of them was like, and also what they've been doing since they decided to leave the bench. And I'm just really grateful and thankful for everyone's time and energy. And hopefully, after we talk about all those things, we will have a brief Q&A. So please be sure to put your questions in our Q&A box as they come up. So hopefully, we'll be able to answer them. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Judge Cordell. And I would really like to know more about your upbringing, Judge Cordell. I attended a panel on MLK Day in Hayward, California, and I learned way more about you than I knew, and I'm hoping to learn more. So I'm going to turn it over to you and share my screen here.
Thank you so much, Adrieannette. Thank you to CLA. Thank you, President Evans. Thank you, Jose Cordova. And thank you, Judge Brenda, my dear friend. So my upbringing, I cannot talk about my upbringing without first starting with my parents, and that's what you're seeing before you. In my book, and it's standing up there behind me, I wrote about my parents in the very first chapter, and this is short, but I want to read this to you. Lewis and Clara Hazard had worked hard to provide for us and to ensure that my two sisters and I went to college. Their mothers had been the help, domestic workers who toiled for next to nothing, serving wealthy white families who resided in Philadelphia's prestigious mainline suburbs. When my mother, a high school graduate, and my father, a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical College, married in 1943, they had neither an inheritance nor a nest egg to get them started. What they did inherit, though, was a terrific work ethic and a powerful drive to succeed. My parents would come to own a home and operate Spring Cleaners, a dry cleaning business that supported our family for 40 years. So my upbringing starts with these two people who worked so hard to raise their three daughters. I'm the middle of three, and my mother used to say as I grew older that I was appropriately the middle child because I always ended up in the middle of everything. She wasn't wrong. We were raised, my sisters and I, in a musical family. My father played woodwind instruments and clarinet, saxophone. My sisters and I grew up learning to play the piano. I also then played the violin straight through high school. My younger sister, the cello. So music was always in our family. Attended a Black Baptist church in the community outside of Philadelphia. It's called Ardmore. That's where I grew up, right on the main line where wealthy old money in this country is located. And my father's dry cleaning business serviced these wealthy people. And as I noted from my passage in the book, both of my grandmothers were the help. They were the domestic workers. And unfortunately, I didn't get to know my grandmothers, one of whom died before I was born. The other died shortly after when we were very little. So I grew up in a Black community, but went to public schools and predominantly white schools because of just where the school district lines were drawn. So I grew up, as my sisters did, and everybody on my street, which was an all-Black street, and living in two worlds. Black community going to school in very good public high schools, and where we were really the tokens, very few of us. So I learned to navigate both of those worlds early on. So my parents encouraged us to to go to college. They didn't encourage, they demanded it. It was going to happen. But education was just so emphasized in my home. And my parents assured us, encouraged us, my sisters and I, that we could do anything we wanted. But the key to it all was education and also being independent. My parents also taught me to question things, taught us all to question, just don't accept what is told to you. And that included me even going to church in a Black community, being able to just having their permission to question what I was hearing and what I was, being taught. So that's basically my life growing up in a very nurturing Black community, a community that unfortunately was also very homophobic, because back in the day, Black folks, it just was not looking at gayness as much of a thing. And I say that because I am gay, and that really didn't come to fruition for me until many, many years later, once I was in college. So things are changing. They need to change more, in my view, in the Black community. But however, I had an upbringing that was fun. When I look back on it, summers were great. You're out playing with the neighbors. It was just, for me, a very, very good time for parents who were very active, last part, in the community. They were community activists, and spring cleaners on Spring Avenue in Ardmore became really a center of the Black community, where my parents, stuff would go down. They'd all meet up at spring cleaners, and my parents were just very involved. My father was the first Black president of the PTA of our elementary school. And again, we were just tokens there. So that was a very big deal. My mother was one of the leaders in our local NAACP. So we learned to give back, to be active in community, not from preaching, but from just watching them and learning by their example.
Wow. Well, that is really fantastic. Thank you for sharing that information. And what's interesting, well, everything that you said was interesting, but I have relatives that are from deep in South Carolina, and they worked as domestics. And in fact, my mom's first job when she was in high school in Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, was cleaning people's houses. And it's really interesting that you said you learned how to navigate both worlds equally. And I'm sure that was something that was really helpful for you when you were elevated to being a judge. So now the question goes to you, Judge Harbin-Forte. Please share how your upbringing impacted you. And let me get to the slide here. Okay. Give me one moment.
You pull it up, I will show you my parents. This is where it all began. And but first of all, let me thank all of you. I'm so pleased to be here, and I am just especially pleased to be here with my mentor, Judge Ladoris Hazard Cordell, who taught me how to be a good and courageous judge and lawyer, because I used to appear before her when she was on the bench. And I'm just really, really pleased to be here, and I'm just so proud of everything that she's done. She gives me courage and inspiration. But these are my parents, Woodrow and Sophie Harbin. You will not, they were common people. They were hardworking in the sense my mom was. My dad was always disabled by asthma, so he couldn't work. And I just remember this traumatic and serious asthma attacks that he would be having, and we would all be afraid that he was going to die. But my mom would work. She worked as a domestic. She was the help. In Mississippi, we grew up in Meridian, Mississippi. She was the help, and she worked for Miss Camp for the longest time. And Miss Camp was a kind of snooty white woman, but she did give us a lot of clothes. And but she would come by and visit us sometimes in our home. But I grew up in extreme poverty. I mean, extreme. If you've seen old pictures of driving down the road, or seeing kids or somebody on a porch, a raggedy porch that was almost falling down or something, that could well have been a picture of me. We were there were 11 kids that my parents had together, and there was never enough to eat. Our grandmother also lived with us. My parents were not educated. My dad had maybe a third grade education. My mom had about a fourth grade education. They were not educated. They were hardworking, salt of the earth people, but they wanted us to be educated. They wanted us to stay in school. They insisted that we do our homework, that we do well. But they really didn't have a real concept of what it meant to just go ahead and go and succeed and graduate even high school and try to go on to college. But they insisted that we better ourselves. We had challenges growing up in Mississippi. We went to segregated schools. Schools were segregated for me until 10th grade in 1970. That's another story about that, how well that went in Mississippi. But the schools were segregated. The good thing was that we had teachers who taught that we owed our community a responsibility to be the best that we could be. We were told that we were the representatives of the Black community. And don't embarrass the Black community. Don't, you do right. You go to church every Sunday, of course, but the teachers did not allow us to act crazy. Now, of course, some people did, and they got in trouble, but the expectation was that we were the representatives of the Black community. When we lived in Mississippi, my mom, in addition to being the help, she also got a job at a hotel. So she would work there and in a restaurant as well. She would sort of steal food to bring home to us. So if there were extra sandwiches or anything that she could put in her bag and bring home to her children, I remember just really feeling excited because she would bring home a veal cutlet sandwich or something, and we would wait, or a hamburger, and we'd wait up until she got home so that we could enjoy that kind of food. But we loved each other. There were all of us. I mean, we'd have fights and there'd be factions and everything, but and there were enough for two wars to be involved. But we helped each other always. My mom was she was you can see her there. She has a sweet face and everything, and she just loved her children, and she was always there for us, even through our rough times. I got pregnant when I was 15 years old and had a child when I was 16.
And Judge Harbin-Forte, let me interject really quickly. Now, I know you're a graduate of a very important high school in Oakland, right?
Yes, now, yes.
So, how old were you whenever you made the move from Mississippi to Oakland, California?
And
Yeah,
before
that's
you
right.
answer that, what number
Yeah,
were you in the 11?
that's where I was getting to.
Okay.
Okay, so I had a kid when I was 16 years old, and that was the same year that we relocated from Mississippi
Okay.
to California. And that was divine intervention because if I'd stayed in Mississippi, I would not even have graduated from high school. My mom would not have been able to watch my child. We would not have been able to do anything. So I probably would have had 5 or 6 children and everything with different daddies, probably, because that seemed to be the way things were going for us in Mississippi. But I moved out here, and again, when I say divine intervention, my grandmother passed on a Sunday, on a Wednesday rather. We buried her on a Sunday. The following Wednesday, my son was born. And 2 weeks later, we were on a plane to California. And I was able to enroll immediately in McClymonds High School in West Oakland. My son was 2 weeks old when we came out here. So I was able to stay in school. I didn't miss any schooling. Stayed in school, went to Cal undergrad and to Berkeley's law school. But that was since that maybe I was supposed to do something with my life. But it was difficult. And having a child, I probably was the only one in the class that had a child. Um, so he graduated with me, class of 72. He was 2 years old when I graduated from high school. And we went on to undergrad at Berkeley. I'd take him to school on the campus with me. They had child care facilities there. I'd drop him off at school and go on to class as an undergraduate. And that's how I made it through. But a lot of prayer, a lot of support from my mom. I did break her heart, and I spent the rest of my life trying to make it up to her. I should say the rest of her life trying to make it up to her for disappointing her. She wanted me to go out and have fun with the rest of the kids and everything. And my dad was like, no, 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 you let her go to that dance. She's gonna end up pregnant. My mom's like, she's not gonna do that. And then I ended up pregnant. So and I don't know how it happened. I think it was kind of like Mary and everything, and the baby Jesus. So I don't know how it happened, but in any event, so that was my growing up in Mississippi. We experienced everything you can imagine: the segregation, the racism, the not necessarily violence for us, but we were always constantly demonstrating. And when we supposedly integrated the high schools in Mississippi in our 10th grade year, we took to the streets for a boycott.
Brenda, could I just ask you one question? You have 11, there were 11 of you. What number are you in the 11?
I am 8th from the top. No, 7th from the top. Yeah. There
Wow.
are five younger than me. And I raised, we grew up raising the younger kids and everything. So I raised my 2 younger brothers and my 2 younger sisters. But yeah, I was 8, so there were 4 under me. And it was interesting.
Wow. Well, that's really fantastic. And what's interesting about both of you is that you both came from very different parts of the country, and both of your parents worked as domestics. And even me, like we're not
Well,
of
my parents didn't. My grandparents did.
I'm sorry, your grandparents. Yes,
Right.
sorry. But even in my family, people worked as domestics. So it's just interesting how the legacy of slavery or race-based slavery in this country has continued. So going to the next thing, what made each of you decide to go to law school? And Judge Cordell, I'm interested in what made you go from a place like Philadelphia to California. And now Stanford is Stanford. So if I could have gotten into Stanford, I definitely would have gone there, right? For sure. But what made that of interest to you?
Right. Some people when they grow up, they know they want to be a doctor. They know they want to be a lawyer. I had none of that. All I knew was that my parents said, you and your sisters are going to go to college. I go to college in Ohio. I went to Antioch, and I ended up majoring in Spanish. Yo puedo hablar español. And
Oh,
I
qué
lived in
bueno.
Mexico. I studied there at the Universidad de Guanajuato.
Okay.
And I got turned off to doing anything more in Spanish because I saw so much racism in Mexico. I lived with a family that were very light-skinned, very wealthy, and the people doing all the cleaning were darker-skinned indigenous folks. And I'm like, here we go. I'm seeing a repeat. So I came back, I switched my major I decided to, make college enjoyable for me. And I majored in theater, drama, and speech, and really learned a lot and had no idea that this was the best preparation I could ever have for being a litigator and then being a judge. So I majored in theater, and I'm not strong in the sciences. That's just not my thing. So law came about because I just ruled out things like I'm not going in math, I'm not going in the sciences. So what is left? Well, there was theater, and I just did not want to be somebody who would try to make it in New York or Hollywood. That just wasn't in my DNA. So I ended up just ruling out things. I took a course in college. It was like a quasi business law class, kind of, but that's when I decided I ruled out everything else. what the heck, I'm going to just apply to law schools. So I come to Stanford. Why? I come because I got rejected at every law school I applied to except Stanford.
Wow.
So I even got waitlisted at some law schools that you've probably never even heard of. I was like, what's going on? And Stanford said, come. So that's why I end up in California. And I remember my mother saying to me, I'm glad you're going to go to law school, but if you go there, you're not going to come back here. And I said, of course I'm coming back. Well, she was right. Who's going to come back to Philly when I'm in here at Stanford, Silicon Valley with the great weather? It's just not going to happen. No mosquitoes, no humidity, none of that stuff. So I end up in law school because I just really I didn't know where it was going to take me. I had never met a lawyer. I'd never met any lawyers of color. So I end up at Stanford, and this is 1971, after living in Mexico, deciding to major in theater, coming out to Stanford, where I'm the only Black woman in my class. And we'll have another slide, not just yet, of my hair, but not yet. And I had a huge afro. There were no female law professors at Stanford and no law professors of color. Nothing but white males. I'm sitting in this classroom, and the classes were about 125 people still per class. And I didn't know what I was doing. You have to learn how to think like a lawyer. What is? So the first year was a hard one for me. And I really had to work hard. And it really didn't click until maybe the end of the second year. Oh, this is what this is about, doing, analysis and everything. So that's really law school. And what clicked for me, I did not like my first year at all. What clicked for me, there were some Black students and some Latino, and we were together. I mean, we supported each other. There weren't many of us, but we were there for each other. But what did it for me was second year, taking a clinical course in juvenile law. So I was in court and I was representing juveniles. And having been a theater major, I don't have a problem speaking in front of people. So in court, who's my audience? It's the jury, or in juvenile court, it's the judge. So I have to persuade. That's what you do on stage, is persuade. So you use your powers of persuasion plus what you know about the law to make that happen. So I ended up then becoming a litigator and trying cases once I finished law school, but we're not there yet. So I just want to talk about that's what law school. So I ended up appreciating it by the time I was ready to graduate.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I agree. I mean, everyone here will know they work you to death your first year, I think, or no, they scare you to death your first year. They work you to death your second year, and I think they bore you to death the third year. But I was never bored. But about Latin America, I actually have a master's in Latin American studies, and part of my interest in that was really learning more about the history of slavery and racism. And I was actually just in Mexico City last month for my birthday, and it's a really fantastic place. And so I too see the unfortunate legacies of slavery and also just colonization whenever I'm there. And also when you look around, being in places like in California, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So the same question goes for you, Judge Harbin-Forte. You were McClymonds High School graduate, went to
Yes.
Berkeley, which was fantastic. What made you decide to go to law school?
Well, it kind of goes back actually to Mississippi, because when we integrated, they finally integrated the high schools in Mississippi. They gave us an all-Black high school for 10th graders. They gave us, and the white students could graduate from the white high school. They were 11th and 12th grade. We had a boycott of classes because of something they had done to one of our Black teachers. During that boycott, we'd meet at night in a church, and sometimes we'd get bomb threats and other things. But Jewish lawyers from Alabama came into Meridian to advise us on how to do a successful boycott. And I was so impressed with them that it was like, wow, I can see that lawyers can really use their experience, their skills to help out the Black community. So I was intrigued by becoming a lawyer. But of course, until we eventually moved to California, there was really no way that I would have been able to become a lawyer. But once we got out here, I wanted to go to law school. I was an undergrad, and I wanted to become a lawyer because I saw that as a realistic goal for me at that point. I wanted to become a lawyer to help people, to help the community, to represent people, to advocate for them, to advocate for protecting rights, to fight against racism, to fight against discrimination that we've experienced so much. When I was in Mississippi, they were so segregated. Black people couldn't even go to the white park. There was a white park, Highland Park. The white kids could go there, black kids could not. They would go to the center, the rec center. They could get free drinks and all other kinds of things, but black kids were not allowed to go there. And it was just all so very unfair that we had to put up with that. So that's how I ended up. And if I'd been able to actually just, skip college even and go to law school, become a lawyer, I would have done that. Similarly, if I'd been able to just skip and go on to the bench, I would have done that. But I wanted to help. That's what I wanted to do.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. And what's interesting about what you said was that Jewish lawyers came from Alabama to help you. And recently, I want to say it was last month, there was a special on PBS, which I watch frequently, about the connection between the African American and the Jewish American community and just the alliances that have been built over time. And so thank you for raising that and bringing that to light. Now, on why a lot of people probably came here today, tell me about what made the bench attractive to you. Judge Cordell, would you like to take that first?
Sure. I had no thought about becoming a judge. So it wasn't in my thinking. I had never seen any judges of color in law school. So I get out of Stanford and I do interviews because everybody interviews to get these big jobs with corporate America. I couldn't get a job. The corporate firms would not hire me. I had this big afro and they're like, it's just not happening. So my parents raised me when there seems to be no way, make a way. And I had time pressure on me because I had student loans to pay back from undergrad. I worked part-time when I was an undergrad, waiting tables. And when I was at Stanford Law School, I worked at Macy's in the juniors department. And it was hard because some of my classmates who would drive to work in their BMWs and Mercedes, and I didn't have a car, I had a bicycle, and they'd come up and, I'm waiting on them as, and so my mantra was always just keep your eyes on the prize. You're going to, graduate and, you're going to be okay. But it was hard. So I had the pressure. I got to pay back these loans. Also, after my first year in college, I got married. And so I ended up, and I didn't have my first child until after I had taken the bar. So I have two daughters, grown now, and with their kids. I have 5 grandkids. So I wasn't thinking about judging. So I start my own law practice right out of law school in East Palo Alto, where there'd never been a lawyer in private practice. That's a whole nother story. Let me just leave it there. During the time I'm practicing law, running my own office, and again, there'd never been a law office, so I had to buy a building. I have no money, bought a building, had it remodeled, and started a law practice. Then it's while I was offered a job, and that was to be assistant dean at Stanford Law School, primarily to deal with the recruitment of Black and brown students to Stanford, which had not a great track record. Mm-hmm. And the judging came about from a random phone call. I get a phone call from a judge on the bench. I didn't know him. His name was Mark Thomas, a white guy in Santa Clara County. And he said, because I'd been in the news for bringing students of color to Stanford Law School, it was a big deal. He called me and he said, how would you like to be a judge pro tem? And what's that? Judge for a day. Just be a judge for a day and hear a small claims case. And he says, we don't have enough women. We don't have people of color. Can I just put you on the list? And you could just do it once. I thought, sure, put me on the list. Then I forgot about it. A few months later, I get a call. Your name's come up. Do you want to come down and be a judge pro tem? Sure. So I go to the courthouse. This was in Sunnyvale. And they give me a robe and they give me a file with only one piece of paper in it. And it's a small claims case. I go take the bench. There's nobody in the courtroom. It's not a bailiff, because this is what the real judges really didn't want to bother with small claims. This was important to me. I go in, and what do I see? Two Black women, one suing the other. And I'm like, what? And this is random. So I write about this in the first chapter of my book called Bitten by the Judge Bug. So I take the bench, I sit down, and the case is all about hair. And I'm like, what? So one was suing the other for not paying her for braiding her hair. So I'm like, okay, I can relate to this. So they explained their case. And at one point during the trial, I asked the person who had her hair braided, I said, could you approach the bench? Can I examine the evidence? And she's like, okay. So she comes up and I'm looking at it. I said, may I touch the evidence? She said, yeah. So I know what to look for. Was it braided tightly? You want to make sure it's not all messy looking down in.
Right. It needed to be a neat little
You
square.
know what I'm saying? Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I also, of course, an important question was, well, when did you braid the hair? I mean, was it done 2 months ago? Or was it done last week? So I knew what to ask. So I hear the case, I hear both sides, and then I make my ruling. I'm not going to tell you what it was. I made my ruling. And after I did it, the two of them said, thank you, Your Honor. And they both leave. And I'm sitting there like, wow, I like this. When people can't make decisions, I know what to ask. And so when I'm driving home that day, I thought, if this had been a white male judge or a white female judge, but mostly these were white male, they wouldn't have known what? What's that? What are we even talking about here? Not knowing anything. And I said, that's why it's so important to have, such diversity on the bench. And it was that experience that led me to apply for a judgeship. And then took 2 years for Jerry Brown to make the decision and to finally appoint me to the bench. And that's how my career on the bench started.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that interesting story. And being a person who had braids last summer, I do know about what happens whenever your braids are not done right, when the parts are incorrect. And I will leave it at that. And President Evans I believe he got his hair braided last weekend, I want to say. So we know full well about that. Judge Harbin-Forte, what made you decide that you wanted to be on the bench?
When I went to law school, I wanted to be a judge. It was like, as I said, if I could have skipped law school and gone directly to the bench, I just wanted to be able to make decisions that could positively affect the lives of the community and of the people in front of me. I particularly wanted to handle criminal cases because there was so much unfairness in the criminal justice system. So I wanted to be a judge. I love being a lawyer though. I love getting up on this to work every day, taking my briefcase into court. I was litigator, I love that. But I also wanted to be the final arbiter, the final decision maker in disputes. I knew as well that a lot of our community members are in the courtrooms and they're fighting. And I really wanted to be a part of that, as Judge Cordell mentioned. Who other than a Black woman would know about braids and whether they were too loose and everything else? But I wanted to do this. So I went into big firm practice after law school. After my first job. My first job was with John Burns' office handling civil rights litigation. Was and also one of the associates in the firm handled some family law. So I got a little bit of that, but I was practicing primarily criminal defense and some civil litigation in the state and federal courts. And I love going to court. And what I saw there too was Delton Henderson was on the federal court bench, and he was just so wonderful. And it was clear that he was trying his way to mentor me and everything. But he always kind of made a big deal of the fact that, that I was there. So he was kind of like, and he told me later too that he enjoyed seeing me with all of these are big firm practice by then when I was in and then I was in our court. So all of us were there with our briefcases and everything, and I was with the big firm. And so here was this little black face there among all of these white males, but holding my own there. So you know, I wanted to be a judge. I wanted to be a judge, and I am so glad that I did. You know, some of the times when I got there, it was important for me to talk, particularly to Black litigants. I remember one of the cases that I had. There were some people, sisters, who were fighting over an estate, their parents' estate, and they were just going after each other, you know, one suing the other and everything. And I talked to them and I said, you know, your parents would be embarrassed. I will bet you that they are turning over in their graves, that you all are in this courtroom fighting each other as though you're not even related to each other. What would your parents want you to do? And you go out in the hallway and you guys resolve this case and don't come back in my courtroom until you have settled it, because you ought to be ashamed of yourselves. And I could say this, you know, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves for acting this way. This is not what your parents would want. And they did resolve it. And I really enjoyed the ability to intercede in that sense. And if you put up the next slide for me, I'll show you a picture of me on the bench, sort of in my early days. And I'll tell you the story about the look on my face there. But I appreciated the ability to connect with people. That's 1998. I was in an arraignment courtroom. And this was a murder case. It was very emotional. It had happened in West Oakland where a brother had killed his sister over property and stuff, and had hidden the body, and everybody was out searching for this person who had gone missing and everything. And so we're in the arraignment courtroom, and when the case is called, there were some people from the community who were there, who were very upset. They were mad at this guy because he had led them. He's out looking for his sister and everything, and the whole community searching for her for going missing, but he knew exactly what had happened to her and where she was. So they were very emotional in the courtroom, and some of them stood and they were just being disrespectful to the defendant and disrespecting my courtroom. And so I lectured them there, and it's kind of like, you know, you don't disrespect my courtroom. You will respect my courtroom. You will respect the defendant here, and I will not have and tolerate these outbursts. So that was me just getting ready to ream them out for acting up. But at the same time, I understood why they were so upset. I could, in fact, my family members knew the victim and also the perpetrators. They knew them. They were all well known in the community of West Oakland. So, but I had to tell them that this is not the way you act in my courtroom. So, that was 1998. I've been on the bench about 6 years there, but I made a difference. And I liked making a difference. When I was presiding judge of the juvenile court, I went over to the juvenile court to see what they were doing to our children in the juvenile court. They were primarily children of color, Black and brown children, on the delinquency side as well as on the dependency side. And so I wanted to know what was going on. And not everybody was asking to serve as presiding judge of the juvenile court, but that's an assignment that I wanted to have. And I got in there, I did what I could. There was lack of resources, but I also was able to save some children from being removed from their homes, because sometimes there were child welfare workers, bless their hearts, who really didn't have a clue about the Black community and phrases and other things that could be said in the Black community by parents. For example, one child welfare worker was upset because the mother in frustration said something about, you know, I'm going to kill you or something. And so she was like, you know, we need to take the child from from the parents because the parents threatened to kill the child. I said, "Child, she was not serious about killing that child. You know how many times my mom and dad threatened to kill me for doing stupid stuff. You know, it is not serious. It is not sincere. Send that child back home." So you're able to connect on that sense. And for the delinquency side, you had young people whose lives were on the slow path to an adult convictions and perhaps to state prison. So I was trying as well to intervene there. And I started the first adoption day when I was there, mass adoption day, because so many of our Black children were hung up in the system, could not get adopted. There was a backlog. So we started an annual adoption day in my first year as presiding judge of the juvenile court in 2000, so that we'd have a mass adoption day and get people placed in their permanent homes, primarily with family members, which is what I insisted on.
Wow, well, that was a lot, and thank you so much for your service. I have the privilege of working in the dependency space, and so I know who comes in, and it is very powerful whenever families of color come in and they can see a judge of color, when they see attorneys of color, when they see child welfare workers of color, because they know that people who at least have a similar experience, can are actually there to help them. And about dependency, Judge Cordell, when we were talking about this, I know that you had a dependency case, but I'm really interested in knowing. Well, I have several questions for you all, and we have to keep track of the time. But Judge Cordell, you were the first Black female judge in all of Northern California. And that is not lost on me. I mean, the time of that, the role, and what's so interesting is that your first case that you judged involved Black women and Black hair. So with that, what I can I go? Should I can I show your second slide?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can kind of trace my time on the bench by my hair. So that's why I put this together. So if you look, I think I was 6 years old. So my mother, my two sisters, we all had, our hair straightened and in braids. If you go over to the far right-hand corner with the big fro, that's me at Stanford, at law school. And so I wasn't, exaggerating when I said I had a big fro, right? It's huge. And so picture being the only Black woman sitting in your law school class looking like this, and then going out to interview for jobs. I was like, I'm not changing. This is where it's going to be. Well, I didn't get a job, and I had to, open a law practice on my own. So with age comes maturity, and you have to realize that sometimes you have to compromise to at least get your foot in the door. I had law school loans to pay off, a lot to do. And by the way, it took me 15 years to pay off all my law school loans. and college, 15 years. So if you look here, this is really my judging, where my life is on the bench. So the bottom right-hand corner, 1982, I've been appointed by Jerry Brown. I have the long, straightened, flowing locks. Then go to the middle on the bottom. That's me having been just elected to the Superior Court, 1988. The hair is shorter, still straightened, and you can see some little white in there because it's gray and because it's a high-pressure job. And then something happened to me. After I was elected in 1988, I just said, you know what? This is me. I am going to be a judge. This robe fits. I feel comfortable in it. And despite the fact that being the first meant I had a lot of hostility coming from the good old boys on the bench who did not want me there. And it was expressed in a lot of very horrible ways. But I figured out how to maneuver and how to stay on the bench, to do the work, and also to be innovative, just like Judge Brenda. She's so innovative. Being a judge gives you the opportunity to look at problems in the system and to fix them. You have the ability to do it, and so many judges don't. They just, take their time to go to work, they go home, but there's so much that can be done. And having a platform as being a judge is so important to be able to make change. So one of the changes I was the first judge in California and maybe in the nation to order first-time convicted drunk drivers to put breath devices, have them installed in their cars. I write about that in my book and about how hard it is, and it was for me, to change a system. Systems resist change. I don't care if it's in schools, it's in the courts, any field. They resist change because people don't like change. They like predictability, knowing that this is going to be the way it is. Well, I didn't make change, and Judge Brenda doesn't do that. Make change just to make change. It's when you see a problem that needs to be fixed. All right, so once I really said, this is me, this is going to be my world for at least the total was just about 20 years, I then decided, okay, I'm going to wear my hair because I'm going to be me. So I cut my hair really short, began wearing it naturally. On the left, I had dreads. I was growing out the dreads. And then I had a box you can see in the middle on the top, and actually it got a lot taller than that by the time it really took care of business. And I can't tell you the looks I'd get. Anita, my bailiff, a Black woman, would say, "All rise." I'd come in with a box over dreads, and I'd get all these looks like either frowns or like, what? And some smiles. And I always keep a poker face, right, Judge Brenda? We keep the poker face. But my thought bubble was, get over it. It's like, I have a right to wear my hair naturally, to look like this, and to be in this space and to wear this robe. And so it really helped me really be who I am by the hair. And so not uncoincidentally, in 2019, the California legislature passed the Crown Act, which went into effect in 2020. Why do we even need a Crown Act? Because of rampant discrimination against Black women wearing their hair naturally in the workplace. So the Crown Act benefits everybody. You can be white and decide, I'm wearing my hair naturally, which is it curls up and I want to make dread. You can do that because you now have the protection of the Crown Act. So when I began wearing my hair naturally the way I wanted to wear it on the bench, I like to believe that, I was kind of ahead of the curve and a little prescient about what it is that we ought to be able to do, particularly as people of color and wearing our hair naturally, and especially on the bench. So that's really kind of what you're looking at is really my journey from little braids to afro to straightened hair to then wearing my hair naturally. So I'll just leave that there for now.
Adrienne, can I add something? Can I supplement an answer?
Sure.
When I talked about wanting to be a judge, I want to tell you the impact of being a Black woman lawyer, going into a courtroom and seeing a Black woman judge on the bench. That was my experience seeing Judge Cordell there, because I would appear in the Santa Clara courts as well. And she was there, she had control of the courtroom, she was serious, she was all those things. but she would always also invite me back into chambers. She'd take a recess and she would talk to me and mentor me. And it was just so wonderful to have that kind of relationship. She is an extraordinary, I love her to death, if that hasn't come through yet. But she just does the right thing and she's always encouraging other people. So I wanted to throw that in. She's an inspiration as well for wanting to be a judge and wanting to sit on the bench.
Wow, well, that's really impressive and amazing. And I can only imagine what you faced being the first, and especially whenever you decided that you were going to be yourself and wear your hair the way that you want to wear it. I mean, I know we're talking about women today, but our own President Evans, we've had conversations. And I tell him that I love his braids and I loved it when he had curly hair as well, right? So I think without the boldness and courage of you two, we would not be able to be here and be in the space and do the things and feel free and feel comfortable that we do today. So I salute both of you for that.
If I could just add, when I was looking at those pictures of Judge Cordell's hairstyles, I've sported many of them as well. I've had the big flat top, I've had the big afro, I've had the S curl, I've had the fade. Now I've got the cornrows and the braids. So I've been following your example and feeling free to express myself. And when I first did it, people told me, "Oh my God, you're endangering your career." But because you paved the way, I have not been fired. I actually got elected with braids. So thank you for paving the way.
Yeah, we need to see photos.
Yes, I have them. I have them.
Well,
And
thank
you
you
can
so
show
much.
my other final photo. I did not,
Okay.
although when I was in college, in law school rather, I had a fro about as big as Judge Cordell's fro. But when I started practicing law, so I don't remember wearing a fro when I was as a lawyer. And on the bench, I kind of kept my hair pressed. And so this was me around 2010 or so, 2011, around that time. And I kept my hair, kind of pressed and, you know, curled. And but this past summer, I decided I was tired of my hair and always trying to get it to act right, and always trying to get it to do right. And so I cut my hair last summer, and as you see now, I'm styling more of a Judge Cordell look and everything, and it is so much easier.
Mhm.
So anyway, but I stayed with the curly hair.
But we like it, and I think it looks great, and I love both of your hairstyles. So I think, and I love the evolution over time. But Judge Brenda, I'm sorry, Judge Harbin-Forte, because I know you affectionately as Judge Brenda. When I met you, whenever I became active, I just started calling you Judge Brenda.
Yes, everybody does. So that's good. That's good. That's my
So,
actual name, Judge Brenda.
so tell me more about your work with diversity and diversifying the bench. President Evans alluded a little bit to it earlier, but now that we're in 2026, we have statistics about what the benches are made, who make up the bench. And so can you tell us a little bit more about your role with this and your involvement and even your interest and like the impetus for this?
Sure. In 2005, I believe the state bar formed a task force, the diversity pipeline task force, and they had various subcommittees. One subcommittee was the government and judiciary or something subcommittee, and I was appointed chair of that. One of the things we looked at was the diversity on the bench. And we knew that there were not enough women and people of color on the bench. So we wanted to know what to do about it. And we were just kind of talking about, well, maybe we'll have a conference or something at the end of the year. This might have been springtime or so. Judge Cordell was on that committee. And Judge Cordell said, What are you talking about in the fall or something, or the end of the year? We're in March. She said, this is an emergency. We have to do something about the level of diversity on the bench. We need to plan something as soon as possible, and we cannot just sit on this. 3 months later, we convened the very first statewide conference on diversity on the bench. And I was a leader of that, convener of that conference. And we pulled together we pulled together the governor's office, we pulled together the state bar, who was responsible, of course, for evaluating people. We pulled together the courts. And then it was the administrative office of the courts and the Judicial Council. And we pulled together law schools. We brought all of them together for a conference in San Jose. And we looked at the level of diversity. And as we were trying to find out, as President Evans said, as Terrence indicated, we had no idea how many women were on the bench. We just assumed we could call up the administrative office of the courts and say, how many women judges are there in the state of California? How many Black judges are there? Nobody had that information. So we did hand count. My committee and I, we called various judges and courts around the state to try to get some preliminary numbers. We looked at counties that had huge minority populations with not one judge of color on the bench anywhere, and not one woman of color. And even if they had judges of color or women, they were very, very low numbers and low percentages as compared to the percentage of the population. So you had people coming into courthouses and not seeing anybody that looked like them, not seeing anybody. And oftentimes court staff was all white as well. So we upset a lot of people with that. What we did at this conference, we presented graphs, bar graphs, showing how low the percentage was and how many counties had no judges of color or women. And we showed those slides, and I will tell you, you could hear a pin drop in the room because people were just horrified. I mean, I think a lot of people thought it would have been better, but it was just quiet. We had the governor's judicial appointment secretary on one of the panels, who was defensive. Schwarzenegger was the governor then. And they had all kinds of excuses about why Black people weren't being appointed and why women weren't being appointed. We also had issues with respect to the evaluation process for the Jenny Commission, because women and people of color were not getting high marks from the Jenny Commission, and people were not they weren't being evaluated properly. So we had to deal with that. And the governor's appointment secretary thought that we were asking for special favors, that we wanted unqualified people to get appointed to the bench, as though diversity and qualified were somehow mutually exclusive concepts. And he was not well received at that conference. But we said, there's a problem. We got to do something about it. And we ended out of that conference, out of that first diversity summit, we got commitments from everyone to increase diversity. We also got through some legislation at the time. Frederica McGee was in Sacramento as chief of staff, and for the Assembly Speaker, for chief of staff for someone, I forget who it was. But in any event, she'd already been working on legislation. And so what happened was that the legislature said, we're not going to give any new judgeships until we get information on the level of diversity. And out of that arose a requirement that annually the governor's office, the state bar, and the courts provide a demographic report about the level of diversity on the bench for the courts, the level of diversity in appointments from the governor's office, and the level of diversity in evaluations from the state bar. And every 5 years, we agreed that every 5 years, we'd have another summit. And so far, that has been going on every 5 years, and we look to see whether we've improved things. The last summit was in 2021. The next summit will be this year sometime, where we will look back and see how much progress we've made. We've been more successful with some governors than with others. But one thing too, one quick thing, and I know we gotta move on. When under Schwarzenegger, Schwarzenegger appointed the first Black woman judicial appointment secretary ever in the state. This was after the white male judicial appointment secretary was no longer on. We saw a radical increase in the level of diversity just with her being in place. So everything, all of the aspects made a huge difference, and we tracked that. We tracked, before Sharon Majors Lewis, who became a judge, she's now retired. Before she was judicial appointment secretary, and after, and the increase in diversity. So we keep pushing. We have to keep pushing. The legislation was also amended so that we also track veterans and people who are disabled, and as well as other groups. And the LGBTQ community also was counted. So it was, I'm glad to have been a part of that. This woman, that judge that's over there, you see, she's on the top right of my screen. She slapped us around basically and said, "Well, you guys just sit around talking about this is an emergency. We need to act as though it's an emergency. How soon can we get a conference in place?" And as I said, 3 months later, we had the very first summit on diversity in the judiciary.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love that you all were geographically close to one another and that you could build your relationship and you would be able to be, in the space and just looking at the work that's happened with the bench in California. The litigation section actually has a program that we've been doing every year. Is this going to be our fourth or fifth one? I can't recall, but it's called Pathways to the Bench. It will be in Sacramento Friday, September the 18th. It is going to be absolutely fantastic. Last year, it was in San Diego, and the year before that, it was in San Francisco. So for those who are interested in learning more about that, please do attend the program on September 18th. So Judge Cordell, now do you prefer Hazard Cordell or Cordell? Because I've been calling you Cordell this whole time.
Because I'm no longer on the bench and no longer have to make decisions. I don't make decisions anymore. So whatever you.
Oh, okay. 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 Tell me about tell me a little bit more about your time on the bench and tell me a little bit more about, I think it was one of your last cases or a case that you kept for a long time.
Right. So compound question, I'll take the second part first. And that is that when I retired from the bench, I've been off the bench longer than I was on. So I've retired in 2001. My last case was a dependency case that I'd kept for 8 years. And it was a very tragic case. 4 brothers. Their mom was clearly mentally ill, and she had basically, in a crisis, had ended up torturing the boys. But she was out of her head. So the case comes in. She was criminally prosecuted, and I got this dependency case with these 4 boys. And I was determined as best I could to keep these kids together. So placement was initially with the maternal grandmother. She was terrific. She was wonderful. And then she suddenly died. I had a heart attack and died. So here these kids are traumatized again. So I then said, okay, they're going with the grandfather. The grandmother and grandfather had been divorced, but he was a good person. He'd been around. That was my view. And that was going fine until he one night drove his car into a tree and killed himself. So now the grandparents out, and I have these 4 boys traumatized over and over. So then I bring the aunties in because their mom had sisters. And there were some that were willing and some not. But even separating the kids among family members was preferable to just farming them out to other people. So I just kept this case. It kept coming back and forth. But I kept the case because I wanted also, we had child advocates assigned to each kid, and I wanted the advocates to stay with the kids. And one of the advocates stayed 8 years with this one child. So my last day on the bench, here comes this one little boy. He's now taller than I am. And he walked in the court, and this was my last hearing for this case. Finally, he was out of the system. He was with his advocate who'd been with him for 8 years. And I just remember him saying, Judge Cordell, thank you for keeping my family together. And I remember coming off the bench, giving him a big hug. That was my very last case. So that's the answer to the first one. Second part is just judging. So I wasn't like Judge Brenda. I was an all-purpose judge. I wanted to do every single assignment. Some judges just want to do one thing, and that's fine. That's fine. So I handled everything, every assignment that you can think of. So that's from, criminal, civil, family court, adoptions, mental health calendar, everything, name changes. I did it all. And I just wanted to learn all of that. So I have to tell you, the last 8 years I was on the bench, I started writing letters to my parents. Why? Because my parents were really interested in what was going on in the courts. And when you're a trial court judge, right, Judge Brenda, never a dull moment. You never know what's going to happen. And I loved it. And I also say, if you want to be a trial court judge, those lawyers who are listening, then don't become a judge if you're not a people person. If you don't like people, don't become a trial court judge. Maybe you want to be appellate so you don't have to deal with people, but you have to like people and understand when they come into a courtroom, usually, other than maybe for a wedding or adoption, they're in crisis. So you got to put that's part of the turf. So my parents loved, and I talked to them on the phone every day. Here's what's going on. They're on the East Coast outside of Philadelphia. I'm here. So I started writing letters. I don't mean text messages. I don't mean emails. I actually sat down Friday afternoons, because generally no hearings Friday afternoon. We're getting the files in for the next week. And I'd sit down and I'd, on my computer, I'd type it out and then I'd print it out. I'd sign it, put it in an envelope with a stamp and send it off. And they weren't to answer me. These were just for them, information. And they were very personal because I also talked about what was going on in my life. These are my parents. I could do this. Okay, I retired from the bench. I go back east. I'm visiting with my parents. My mother was a very organized person. And during my visit, she pulls this box out of our middle room closet. And she said, what do you want me to do with all these? And I looked, my mother had saved every letter I had written every Friday for 8 years. And I was like, what the? And I hadn't made copies. So I said, okay, let me just packed them up and sent them back to me. Took me maybe 3 years to say, I'm going to take a look at these letters. And I started reading the letters. And that's where I was just shocked. I was shocked by the variety of cases over which I presided just the last 8 years of a 20-year span. And also the quantity, just how many cases. So those letters really formed the basis for my writing this book. So I didn't write the book until 2021. That's when it was done. It took me a year to write it, but it's a story about judging. And it's a very personal story. It's my story about judging from the time I got interested by being a judge pro tem and, dealing with the Black women suing each other, to the last 8 years where I did everything in this book. It's got adoptions and name changes, 3 strikes cases, all of this stuff in it. And it's because judging was my passion. It was my passion for 20 years. And that does not mean that every day was a wonderful day. I had some horrible days, and I had some wonderful days. So it was the best and it was the worst. Just a combination of everything, of the human experience coming into the courtroom. And the fact that I'd been a theater major was great for judging, because as a judge, I'm the producer director. So you stand up when I tell you to stand up, you shut up when I tell you to shut up. I didn't say shut up, but I said, counsel, I've heard enough. You need to stop talking. Please sit down, that kind of thing. But I'm producer director. And it was almost like a natural thing, again, from being a theater major way back in the day. So I wrote this book because, and it isn't just for lawyers, I wrote it for everyone who cares about our legal system, because it's broken. It's broken in so many ways. And I'm not just specifically, but probably mostly in the criminal side. So I don't call it a criminal justice system. because we're not there. Justice is a work in progress in that system. It is broken. It's a criminal legal system. But I wrote it to educate everybody about judging, to entertain, because there's stuff in there. There's lots of war stories. And Judge Brenda, I mean, I'm sure she has stories that would just have you cracking up about things that happen in the courtroom, which is another reason why I love being a trial court judge. And then I wrote it to energize people. Educate, entertain, energize, to say there are things that are wrong, they're broken, and we really need to fix them. So there's the next to last chapter is called The Fix, where I propose at least 10 things that ordinary people can do to make the system more just and more fair. So judging was my life for the time I was on it. I wrote about it, and I'm still passionate about it, but my role now, I see it, as is Judge Brenda's, is trying to make the system more fair and just from the outside. Now we're on the outside, and writing this book was a part of that journey for me.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. When I posted that I was having you all on my panel, one of my sorority sisters was like, Judge Cordell, I have that book. And I just said, wow, that's fantastic. So it's known to people who are attorneys and who are not attorneys. And thank you for that. So this gets to the last part of our discussion today. And I'm really curious to know more about what you all have been up to since you decided to leave the bench. I mean, I know Judge Harbin-Forte, you were involved in a highly publicized recall of someone, and I will let you talk about that. And I know Judge Cordell, you were also involved in a lot of political work, and I know that when you're no longer a judge, you can say the things that you want to. So, who would like to go first? Judge Harbin-Forte, would you like to share?
Sure, sure. I led the recall of our corrupt mayor in Oakland, Mayor Shane Tao, who is now under federal criminal indictment by the feds. And she was indeed corrupt. And she never should have been elected in the first place, because she didn't even get on the ballot in the correct way. City attorney's office didn't keep her off the ballot as it should have. And she ended up, because we have this crazy ranked choice voting system, she ended up winning the election. Totally incompetent, did not know what she was doing. And just, it turned out, if you read her indictment, it's kind of like a bad novel. Some of the stupid things that they did, the money that they did, the money that they were taking, all of those kinds of things. But that was controversial. There were all kinds of allegations. Oh, she's a woman of color. She was Hmong, a Hmong mayor. She's a woman of color. I shouldn't be trying to remove a woman of color. There were allegations that recalls were anti-democratic. Kind of, the Constitution provides the recall of elected officials, and it is the most democratic way you have of removing elected officials. And you could, other than assassinating them, the recall is the way to do it. We could not afford to wait another 3 years for her to come up for election, because she was taking Oakland down. Crime was increasing. She fired our Black police chief. I mean, just all kinds of things. So that did not win me a lot of friends, but she was recalled with like 63, 64% of the vote. And we were very, very happy that we were able to do that. And then I also ran for city attorney unsuccessfully. But that was an experience. I'll tell about that one day. But that was an experience because I wanted to change the system. I think we got to change the system from the inside. And we have to be willing to just step up and try to do the courageous things as on the bench, which is what you have to do as well. You got to be courageous on the bench. You got to take the criticism, as long as you're doing what you feel is the right thing to do and is the right decision.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for all of your work.
Well, thank you, and I'm constantly on TV at press conferences and things like that because I'm involved with NAACP, and we're very active in the Oakland community. and we've taken some stances on various things. So we have press conferences, we agitate, we educate, and if necessary, we will litigate. So that's where we are. I'm chair of the Legal Redress Committee for the Oakland branch of the NAACP.
Well, thank you very much, Judge Harbin-Forte. Judge Cordell, I know you've been involved in some political things as well. Do you want to talk to us about that?
Sure, very briefly. So when you're a retired judge, you are unleashed. You can do
Yes.
and say whatever you want. And it was so liberating to be able to do that, because when you're a judge, there are very few things you can actually speak about. So I want to pick up on the recall, because I am one of those who's actively involved in changing the law regarding recalls of judges. So there is one sentence in the California Constitution that says elected people can be removed by electors, that's you, the voters, with a recall. So what that provision does not do is distinguish politicians, elected officials, from judges. It lumps us all in. Judges are not politicians. Politicians make promises to the constituents to do whatever it is constituents want, and that's fine. That's what politicians do. The only promise a judge can make is to uphold the law and to uphold the Constitution. So I don't have an issue with recalling horrible, bad judges. I have a problem with lumping them in with politicians. And I believe the recall of judges should only be for cause. If the judge has committed a crime, if a judge has been negligent in performing duties, those kinds of things. But right now, if somebody just doesn't like the way the judge is wearing her hair, that person can get a petition to remove a judge. That's how loose it is, and how that's really what's going on in California now. And the focus has been on judges of color. There are judges of color, 6 that preside in family court in one of our counties, who are all being targeted because maybe one judge made one decision that somebody didn't like, and they put it out there, start lying. Same thing that's happening around the state, and particular focus on judges of color. So there is work now going on by the California Judges Association to not make, I think there should be a constitutional amendment in the California Constitution, but it's very expensive and it's very iffy. So there are changes that are being made now, recommended to CJA, about how one can bring a petition to recall a judge. So I, again, made a lot of enemies when I spoke up against the recall of Judge Aaron Persky, who made a decision that a lot of people didn't like, because he didn't send this Stanford expelled freshman, no criminal history, to prison, but instead gave him a 6-month jail sentence. Perfectly legal, within the judge's discretion. People didn't like it. He has since been recalled, and his life ruined, basically, because you Google his name, this is what comes up. Regardless of how one feels about the sentence, he did nothing unlawful, and actually had a track record of, no sustained complaints at all. Been on the bench for 12 or 13 years. That's the power of recall, and what people who can say anything they want about judges can make happen. So I got a lot of pushback. At the same time, it's like, we need to protect judicial independence. That's what's at stake here in California. And I'm very, very concerned about what can happen along the way. So I was involved in that once I was off the bench. And since then, I've been involved in sitting on blue ribbon commissions to investigate the death of an inmate in the Santa Clara County jails, to investigate the racist and sexist texting scandal in the San Francisco Police Department, and most recently to investigate the San Mateo County Sheriff, who was recalled and removed. And I did an independent investigation about that. But let me just talk about one thing you can still do as judges. So when I was on the bench, the California Judges Association had a portfolio where money comes in and it gets invested in various stocks or whatever. That's part of how we maintain the money. And one of the investments, they were investing in companies that did business in South Africa. And when I was on the bench, this is when apartheid was there. Mandela was still on Robben Island. So when I was on the bench, I was very outspoken about, we needed to divest our money from companies that were doing business in South Africa. And boy, did I catch hell. Not from judges of color, and there were very few of us at the time, but from within the bench. And I got a real sense of, okay, this is when you're trying to change a system and people are so entrenched, they don't want to hear it. But it actually, what it did, it emboldened me. It actually emboldened me to say, and guess what happened? They did divest. It wasn't immediate, but they did divest because the pressure built. So it really takes people like a Judge Brenda, who she wanted to be a judge. She's on the bench and she didn't waste her time. She was like, of course, you have to preside over cases and you do arraignments, thousands of them, thousands. And yet she's looking around like, what can be done to be made better? So I'm here to encourage lawyers, especially lawyers of color, lawyers in the LGBTQ plus communities, to think about becoming judges. It's harder to be a judge today than it was for me, because we have social media that you make a decision, people will jump on it, distort it, tell lies. It's harder. That just means you have to have more courage. So, I see you nodding, Adrieannette. You're one. I'm talking to you. It should really, really contemplate this. Same thing with President Evans. We need courageous people to wear these Black robes and to make the system work better than it already does. That being said, I wouldn't trade anything for being a judge. And I just want to wrap up with me very quickly. I'm going to read you my last sentence in my book. And it's just one sentence. And it goes like this. Judging has been the most fulfilling of my various careers. For nearly 20 years, I wielded power over the lives of thousands of people. And for nearly 20 years, I did what I believed to be right. While it is up to the next generation of voters, politicians, activists, lawyers, law professors, and judges to continue to clear the path to a more perfect union, I refuse to give up on our legal system, and I will never give up on our judiciary, and hopefully neither will you.
Wow. Well, that was powerful and well said. And the thing that I think I missed asking both of you about was the rule of law. But Judge Brenda, I see that your hand is up.
Oh, I was just going to, since we're getting to the end, I wanted to say I agree with Judge Cordell. There ought to be a different standard of recall for judicial office for our judges. Doesn't make sense to lump them into politicians and with politicians. But I also want to say how important it is for you to serve on the bench. If you have any idea, any inkling, go for it. You make such a huge difference. I think about the cases where sometimes it was like divine intervention, where I was put in a position to make a difference in the lives of particularly young Black people. One case in the juvenile court where this guy, he's on his way to college. He was stupid and he ended up going with some friends. They robbed somebody. The DA wanted me to put him in CYA in the youth prison, basically. And I didn't. I would not do it because it's clear that he had just made a mistake. And yeah, it was stupid, but he's young. So anyway, and I just refused to do it. I placed him on probation, basically, told him to go on off to college. He'd already been accepted to college and to do well. And he did just that, never got in trouble again. But I took the heat for those kinds of things. In dependency cases as well. When there were times, there was one woman that had been trying to take this woman's child forever, and I'd stopped them from doing it. And I just happened to be sitting in another person's courtroom one day, another judge's courtroom, filling in, and this case came up where they were trying to take the woman's child again. And it's kind of like, no, you're not taking her child. Give that child back to her, put services in place. You can do so much. The motion to suppress that I granted, that other judges would never have granted, but I knew the officer was lying. It's like, and no, it did not go down that way because, and I believe the defendant. So you just have to have the courage to do the right thing. And so I think one of my worst decisions was when I didn't have the courage to do what I knew that I was supposed to do. And I still feel guilty about the outcome of that case. And had I done what was right, it would have been different. So get in there, apply for the bench, serve as a pro tem in the meantime, and help our democracy, because it is indeed under threat. And the craziness that's going on a national basis is so scary.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. We could keep talking, but we are at our time. So
Right.
thank you so much to our illustrious, fantastic, fabulous panelists. Thank you to President Evans and Chair Cordova for joining today. And
Thank you
I
to our wonderful moderator. You did a
well, thank
Thank
wonderful
you.
you.
job. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank
Thank
you.
you. It's hard to
Thank
rein in two judges like us. You did a great,
Yeah,
great job.
you see, we can talk, you know.
You did a great job.
thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
All
Take
right. Take
care.
care.